Ladies and gentlemen, the program will begin in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, today's program is about to begin. Welcome to the 14th Annual Sustainability Summit. To begin our program, please welcome Nadine Watt, Chair of the Los Angeles Business Council.
Are we ready?
I can hear you, Nadine.
Okay, great. I hope we're ready. I can't tell because I can't see myself, but good afternoon and thank you for joining us today for the first day of the 2020 LABC Sustainability Summit. The Los Angeles Business Council convenes this annual Sustainability Summit, now in its 14th year, to bring together policymakers, thought leaders, leading businesses, and more to discuss how to advance sustainability and economic development in our region. We are excited that today's event is being held in partnership with my alma mater, University of Southern California President Carol Folt, the USC Saul Price School of Public Policy, and the USC Schwarzenegger Institute. Every year, we look forward to this outstanding and important event. While unfortunately we could not be together in person, we have created a high-level, 2-day interactive virtual experience to learn about how our public and private leaders are responding to our most pressing issues of climate change, social equity, and economic recovery. We are incredibly grateful for all of you who have joined us today, and hopefully you will join us tomorrow as well. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge some of the people and organizations that have worked hard to put this together. Thank you to our summit co-chairs, 8-Minute Energy, Pattern Energy, Wells Fargo, the California Community Foundation, 5 Point Holdings, JP Morgan Chase, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, Southern California Edison, and Walmart. And also to our event hosts, AECOM, EDF Renewables, GAF Energy, PCS Energy, and United Airlines, as well as all of our committee level sponsors who you can find listed in our program guide. Without your continued support, today's event would not be possible. I would also like to acknowledge our over 75 cooperating organizations representing important environmental, health, equity, and clean energy organizations for being with us today and for your help promoting this summit. You will see a list of cooperating organizations in your program guide as well. 2020 has been an unusual and challenging year, to say the least. As we continue to fight a global health pandemic, we are also attempting to curb historic wildfires, superstorms, floods, and blackouts. But from chaos, there also comes opportunity. These past several months have shown us where our strengths and vulnerabilities lie as a region. Over the course of the summit, you will hear how our transition to a clean economy and environment can help recover tens of thousands of lost jobs, ignite economic stimulus, and address deep disparities in health outcomes and social inequities. Today, we have an amazing program for you, featuring a leading member of Congress fighting for environmental justice, titans of industry trailblazing a path toward a clean economy, a former Deputy Secretary of Energy discussing energy diplomacy and security, and a panel of public and private leaders working toward a 100% renewable future. I'd like to express our gratitude to Mary Leslie and her LABC team for their months of work and preparation putting together this event twice and crafting this outstanding lineup, even with numerous challenges and uncertainties in the planning process. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our partner host and my new best friend, Interim Dean of the USC Saul Price School of Public Policy. He holds the Leonard Schaefer Director's Chair and is a distinguished professor of public policy, pharmacy, and economics. Since its inception, Dr. Goldman has led the USC Schaefer Center for Health Policy and Economics, one of the nation's premier health policy programs. He is an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine and the National Academy of Social Insurance, two of his field's highest honors. He is the author of more than 300 articles, and his research has been published in leading medical, economic, health policy, and statistics journals in other media, including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, The Economist, and NBC Nightly News. Always ahead of the curve, Dana Goldman learned to drive an electric car back in the 1970s. Please welcome Dr. Dana Goldman.
Thank you, Nadine. It's really a pleasure for us to co-host this, and we appreciate your leadership at this critical juncture and taking on this task as we deal with the roiling of COVID and what it has meant for all of us. It's our pleasure at the Price School to be a supporter of this summit because obviously the business sector has a leading role to play in addressing climate change. And to see this, I want to roll back the clock actually several decades. If you think back to where we were 30 or 40 years ago, one of the most pressing policy issues of the day at that time was poverty. And one of the greatest accomplishments we've achieved over the last 25 years has been global economic growth, which has lifted more than 1 billion people out of extreme poverty. And if you want a specific example of this, think of China. China, which has averaged 10% a year in GDP growth, has essentially lifted 850 million people out of poverty. But we all know that this economic growth has a cost, and China, like our own country, is not immune. It now accounts for more than 1/4 of the carbon emissions of the globe, which is even more than the United States. So the question now becomes both a global one and a local one. And as you pointed out, Nadine, how can we continue economic progress, but not at the expense of the environment or equality? And these are really the critical economic questions that you as the Business Council must face, but also we as a policy school. But I'd also like us to keep in mind some lessons. If some of you may be familiar with Larry Summers, he was a professor at Harvard, an economist, and then he went to become chief economist of the World Bank, and then he was Secretary of the Treasury under President Clinton. And now he's an advisor to Joe Biden on economic policy. But back in 1991, his career was almost derailed because he wrote a trade memo in which he said that dumping toxic waste in least developed countries would be an economic benefit because we could pay them to take our waste and it would help them with economic progress. He later walked back the memo and claimed it was sarcastic, but he stood by this belief, and it is true that there are trade-offs between economic growth and the environment, as I already pointed out. And so the point is that we now know that there are not just issues of efficiency, but also issues of justice and environmental justice that we'll need to address as well. By the way, this infamous memo didn't derail his career, as I already said, and he also became the president of Harvard. So you can make of that what you will. The point of the story is that it's not about efficiency anymore. We can't just solve our sustainability crisis with economic growth. It requires expertise and innovation across disciplines and across sectors. And we can't talk about sustainability without talking about equity. I believe that we can find an approach that satisfies being cost effective, supporting business, and making our communities worldwide safer, cleaner, and more equitable. And with that in mind, the Price School, which is driven by a mission to improve the quality of life for people and their communities worldwide, is very excited to be a sponsor. Thank you.
Now joining us is David Wilhelm, Chief Strategy Officer at Hecate Energy, to introduce today's first Spotlight Session speaker.
Group you probably have never heard of, Hecate Energy. First, a shout out to Mary Leslie. In 1992, she was the California Finance Chair for Bill Clinton's campaign while I held down the fort in Little Rock. So God bless Mary Leslie for still fighting the good fight And God bless me as well, I guess. And God bless to all the people on at this event for all the policy work you do. The feed-in tariff that was established a few years ago for the LADWP really helped give our company a start. But you're about to hear about Hecate Energy in the months and years that lie ahead. We are the largest independently owned solar and storage developer in the United States. And that independently owned thing is one of our key competitive advantages. Because we are competitive, we are supplier agnostic, we are financing agnostic, and it is that independence that gives us an edge in terms of agility, in terms of creativity and cost. Anyway, I'm calling in right now from Columbus, Ohio. And in Ohio, Hecate has just closed on a 400 megawatt project in the Appalachian part of the state, my old stomping grounds, where because of our efforts, the sons and daughters of coal miners now have a stake in the new energy economy. It's a game changer. And I guess in a very real way, what you did to change policy in Los Angeles years ago has allowed us to make that possible today. So remember that name, Hecate, or for you beer drinkers out there, Hecate, like Tecate. So anyway, it is now my pleasure to introduce this year's first Spotlight speaker. The Spotlight sessions are meant to highlight innovations and new models for addressing our complex needs when it comes to sustainability. Our first Spotlight speaker, Mary Wenzel, is the head of sustainability and corporate responsibility at Wells Fargo. In this role, Wenzel is responsible for the strategic integration of sustainability and corporate responsibility across Wells Fargo's many products and services, operations and culture, and philanthropy. They say culture beats strategy every time. Mary Wenzel is involved in both culture and strategy. She has a huge job in addition to sustainability, human rights concerns, environmental risk and social risk management, community development, and philanthropy all fall under her areas of engagement. And Mary Wenzel is getting things done, providing $200 billion with a B in financing to environmentally beneficial businesses. And she and Wells Fargo have committed $50 million in philanthropy over the next 5 years to the American Indian and Alaska Native communities. And she is forging strategic philanthropic partnerships with groups like the US Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory and Grid Alternatives to accelerate the transition to a low carbon economy. Now here's what I found on the Google machine. The name Wenzel is short for Wenceslaus, like old King Wenceslaus. So I just had to share that. I'm betting the Feast of Stephen is huge at the Wenzel household. So without further ado, please welcome Wells Fargo's Head of Sustainability and Corporate Responsibility, Mary Wenzel.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, David. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me? Yeah, great. Thank you. So Wenzel is my married name, but I have seen the statue in Prague of King Wenzel. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you to all of you. I'm pleased to join the Sustainability Summit today and to support our ongoing engagement with so many of you that are focused on sustainability in Los Angeles, throughout California and the broader country. As David mentioned, at Wells Fargo, we are on a journey to embed sustainability across our value chain. Let me first mention, the interconnectedness of the environment. I live in Boulder, Colorado, and we've been experiencing unhealthy air quality from the fires in the West. And our hearts go out to all of you and all of those impacted by the wildfires. We believe that climate change represents one of the greatest challenges of our time, and we are on a journey to engage our clients, our community partners, and to lead by example in our own company to accelerate the just transition to a low carbon economy. As David mentioned, we've been investing and lending in our businesses to support that transition. In 2018, David beat me to the punch. We announced a commitment to provide $200 billion in financing to sustainable businesses and projects by 2030. More than 50% of that $200 billion will go to support companies and projects that directly lead to a low carbon future economy. Those include clean energy projects, green buildings, green bonds, and alternative transportation. The other 50% will support projects focused on broader sustainability issues, including sustainable agriculture, conservation projects, recycling, resource management, and other activities. In the first 2 years of our commitment, we've deployed approximately $49 billion in capital to those with about 2/3 of it going to those low carbon opportunities. An example of that is that we've invested over $8 billion in wind and solar projects, about 400 projects across the company through our renewable energy and environmental finance business. So David, we may need to talk to give you an idea of that impact. At the close of 2019, our tax equity investments represented over 10% of all solar and wind generation capacity in the US. And importantly, we're working with our clients in their own sustainability journeys. We're all on a journey together. And so we want to engage our clients in their own journeys as they add renewables to their generation mix, as they add clean technologies to their operations. We have a dedicated staff that engages with our clients on climate risk management and other environmental and social risk management to share best practices and expectations so that, we walk the talk, that we support our clients in their journeys, and that together we address kind of pressing sustainability challenges. We recognize as one of the largest US banks that we have a role to play in financing the low carbon transition, and we're working to innovate our products and services to deliver on that. And as David mentioned, it's critical that we walk the talk in our own operations, that we embed sustainability into our organization, into our culture, into the DNA of our company. With over 270,000 employees, nearly 100 million square feet of real estate, we have our own environmental footprint to manage. And we're working hard to minimize our environmental impacts by setting ambitious reduction and efficiency targets and goals, and by harnessing the passion of our employees to act more sustainability at work and at home. I think we're making tremendous progress. Since 2008, we've cut our water consumption and our greenhouse gas emissions by more than 50%, and we've achieved carbon neutrality in our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. We're working hard to meet the remainder of our environmental operational commitments. Since 2007, we've been meeting 100% of our global electricity needs through renewable energy, starting with renewable energy certificates, but quickly transitioning to renewable energy commitments that help support development of new renewable energy by added on-site generation, by signing contracts for new long-term sources of renewable energy. The EPA's Green Power Partnership says we are the 8th largest user of renewable energy in the US, and hopefully that will only increase. We want to meet our renewable energy commitments in a way that delivers benefits to communities where we have a strong business presence. And a great example of that is that right there in Southern California, we announced a few months ago that we would purchase 100% of our California eligible renewable energy load at a facility currently being constructed in Riverside County, and believe it's important to contribute to local job growth, generating tax revenue, reducing emissions locally, and contributing to grid resilience. And lastly, I wanted to highlight our community partnerships. We all know that it takes a village, that we have to work together to really tackle some of these significant sustainability challenges. And so the third major area of focus for our sustainability efforts is in the area of partnerships and engagement. In 2015, we launched the Wells Fargo Innovation Incubator, or IN2, to help drive technology innovation and de-risk promising startups and entrepreneurs that have potential game-changing technologies. IN2 is a $50 million partnership with the US Renewable Energy Lab, or U.S. Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Lab. Sorry, that's a mouthful. We support those entrepreneurs with non-dilutive capital, technology support and validation at NREL's labs, and an introduction to an ecosystem of funders, partners, and investors that can help promote their sustainability innovation. And we're seeing great results from that. Participants in the IN2 program have collectively been able to raise $313 million in follow-on funding from their participation in the program. And I'm really pleased to give a shout out to one of our key partners within IN2, the LA Clean Tech Incubator. We've worked with them in the program and also recently supported the launch of their Advanced Prototyping Center Fellowship, which is a 3-month program that has provided more than 100 underemployed participants with experiential training and direct connections with job opportunities at LABC's portfolio of companies and partner organizations. So a really great initiative that we're very pleased to support. Grid Alternatives, which is also based in California, is another one of our important partners. They're a national nonprofit that brings solar power and workforce development opportunities to underserved communities and individuals. We've provided over $12 million to support Grid's work, including their expansion nationally and their Troops to Solar Veterans program. And lastly, through our Wells Fargo Builds program, our team members have volunteered and donated hundreds of hours working with Grid to install solar on low-income households. It's really a tremendous opportunity for engagement and for our team members to feel like they're doing good and supporting communities. And the last program I just wanted to highlight quickly is our 4-year partnership with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation called Resilient Communities. It was a $12 million partnership to help communities prepare for future climate-related challenges. Unfortunately, I'd say for climate-related challenges that have arrived. The program has invested across the nation in helping communities adapt and build resilience through natural ecosystems and enhancing community capacity. So let me close there. There's much more I could talk about in terms of our products, in terms of our environmental and social risk management practices and our innovation, but I wanted to provide a high-level overview and a challenge to think about all the levers we all have to pull in this sustainability journey. It's critical that we all do our parts. The challenges are large, but I think, as David and others have said, you need to remain optimistic in roles like ours and believe that together we can address these challenges. So thank you for inviting me to speak today, and thank you for all that each of you do to support sustainability in LA, California, and beyond.
Please welcome Kip Field, Southern California Area Manager at HDR, to introduce today's first keynote speaker.
For those of you who are not familiar with HDR, we are a global design firm with a strong local presence in Los Angeles. We constantly strive to grow and to use our talent and knowledge to change the world for the better. With over 400 professionals here in Southern California focused on supporting our clients in developing sustainable, resilient systems and infrastructure for healthcare, civics, water, transportation, energy. HDR is helping clients and communities around the world take urgent action to decarbonize infrastructure systems to avoid the most substantial impacts of climate change. Reducing carbon emissions requires fundamental changes to nearly every aspect of community infrastructure. From the buildings where we live and work and the energy that powers them to the way we get around. We assist our clients in optimizing these connections between community infrastructure and reduction in carbon emissions while promoting economic and social prosperity. I am honored to introduce today's congressional keynote speaker, Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester. Congresswoman Blunt Rochester is a member of both the Energy and the Environment and Climate Change subcommittees on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, where she has worked tirelessly in improving healthcare, the environment, commerce and trade, energy policy, telecommunications, manufacturing, and consumer protection. As the sole member of Congress for Delaware, which is one of the states most at risk for the impacts of climate change, Congresswoman Blunt-Rochester understands the need for strong environmental action and is also a national leader on environmental justice issues. She worked with allies in Delaware and Washington to help usher a critical piece of legislation into law, the Strengthening Coastal Communities Act, which aids homeowners and sets aside hundreds of acres for environmental protection. She is a leading voice in Congress on economic and the future of work related issues. As former Secretary of Labor and State Personnel Director, the Congresswoman leverages her personal experience to advocate for legislation that boosts startup business growth, removes barriers for citizens re-entering society, and addresses college affordability and ballooning student debt. As a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and a strong proponent of reforming our criminal justice system, she introduced first in the nation legislation, the Clean Slate Act, sealing the federal records of former nonviolent offenders that remain crime-free and have earned a second chance. This bill would provide new opportunities for Americans to earn a good-paying job, pursue education and training, and rent or own a home. According to estimates by the Center of American Progress, the passage of the Clean Slate Act could boost the US economy by as much as $87 billion per year. We are excited to hear her keynote on a clean energy COVID recovery. Please welcome Congresswoman Lisa Blunt-Rochester.
Thank you so much, Kip, for that introduction. To the Los Angeles Business Council, my good friend, your incomparable mayor, Eric Garcetti, industry leaders, all of today's speakers, and everyone tuning in. As was said, I'm Lisa Blunt-Rochester, Congresswoman from the small but mighty state of Delaware. And it is my pleasure to join you for this year's Sustainability Summit. I'm Zooming to you live from Washington, D.C. And before I officially begin my remarks, I want to take a moment to say that I hope that you and your families are safe and healthy. The scenes that we have watched over the last few weeks from the wildfires have been heartbreaking, and my thoughts are with all Californians and the Pacific Northwest. For those of you who are business owners, small business owners or large, I hope that your business has been able to weather the storm of COVID-19. With the wildfires destroying lives and communities on the West Coast and the Gulf and East Coast simultaneously bracing for the worst hurricane season in decades, it is clear that the climate crisis is not decades away, but it is here and now. We're also facing the daunting reality of a global pandemic, the resulting economic depression, and a racial reckoning. So today, I'm going to discuss with you how we can rebuild from this pandemic to a cleaner, healthier, and stronger 21st century economy. Let me start by giving you a little bit of a context and background on myself and where I come from. As Kip said, I'm privileged to represent the state of Delaware as the lone member in the House of Representatives. We only have one. And I've also had the privilege of serving as Delaware's Secretary of Labor and Head of State Personnel, as he said, but also as the CEO of the Urban League in Delaware. These roles have given me the opportunity to focus on one of my true core missions in life, connecting people with their purpose, a job, career, or business. Like California, Delaware is a coastal state, and our status as such has given us an unfortunate preview of what the rest of the country will see when it comes to extreme weather and climate change. Unlike California, though, our challenges aren't generally drought, wildfires, or extremely high temperatures. Instead, with Delaware as the state with the lowest mean elevation in the country, our challenges have to do with eroding coastlines, rising sea levels, and chronic flooding. These challenges are not confined to any one part of our state either. The southern part of Delaware is seeing chronic beach erosion, costing the state hundreds of millions of dollars a year and threatening our tourism economy. The middle of our state is experiencing the loss of usable, reliable farmland to grow crops and sustain our thriving agricultural economy. In the northern part of our state, in our largest city of Wilmington, has some neighborhoods that have chronic flooding every time it rains. These challenges obviously impact the residents of the state of Delaware and the municipal and local governments that they are represented by them. But they also impact the businesses that serve our residents and drive our economy. What has been my passion for many years, but especially since coming to Congress, has been tied to purpose, and that is the future of work. I'm proud to be the founder and co-chair of the first of its kind bipartisan, and I'm going to say that again, bipartisan Future of Work Caucus in Congress. One of the things that my work has focused on over the last few years has been the changing landscape of our economy and what things might look like for businesses and workers 5, 10, 20 years from now. When the caucus first began, it was my belief that automation, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and technology in general would be the driving forces behind the changing economy and workforce. However, as we've seen over the past many months, it has been a global pandemic that has caused the acceleration of change. Things like telework, to distance learning, and telehealth have been talked about for decades, but are now a reality on scale. While the cause of this change was something that none of us could have imagined just a year ago, the consequence of this change is something that many of us have been thinking about for a very long time. During these trying times, we've seen the remarkable resiliency and creativity of businesses across the country. Whether it was adapting their traditional business models to fit the times and our needs during this health crisis, shifting or retrofitting their workplaces, or creating entirely new models to help generate revenue and keep workers on payroll. Businesses have been at the forefront of our economic evolution. And while we weren't expecting it to come this rapidly and in this form, change is here. And it is now our obligation to harness it and to shape our own destiny as a nation. Now, I can't say that I'm a huge race car fan, although I have been to a few Formula One races, once in Shanghai, and another time I attended the first ever night race, F1 night race in Singapore. But there's a term that I've heard used in the sport that I believe relates to our changing landscape. To paraphrase it, you have to accelerate into the curve. The meaning is simple, that if you are too cautious and slow, you can fall behind, could cause a crash, others will blow right by you, or you can lose the race altogether. There is no mistake. This is quite a daunting curve that we as a nation have encountered. At the beginning of it, Congress did our part to meet the moment, but some in our institution would have us take our foot off the gas. It's not enough for us to simply hope to keep American workers, families, and businesses afloat during this time of unprecedented change. Rather, we need to equip them with the resources, support, and tools they need to take advantage of this economic evolution. We need to intentionally build our economy and businesses back to simultaneously tackle the myriad crises we face. And I firmly believe that the road back is through clean energy. In fact, this week, we in the House will be voting to make a substantial investment in clean energy research and development. The first and second industrial revolutions, the dawn of this information age, and now this revolution, this is not the first time that we've seen disruption or massive change. But the challenges we now face are unique to our time. And they are an acknowledgement and acceptance that this next revolution can and must be not only economic, but environmental and equitable as well. Too many times before, when our economic paradigm shifted, many of our fellow citizens were left behind. Too many times before, the soil, water, and air that would play host to those revolutions were afterthoughts and accepted casualties of progress. For too long, we've been told that economic prosperity and environmental stewardship were intrinsically and inalterably at odds. Well, that's a false choice, and one that California, the city of LA, the businesses, and your mayor have proven wrong again and again. It has been inspiring to see the cutting-edge partnerships and policies that Mayor Garcetti has implemented here in Los Angeles. And we've seen examples of similar successes all across the country, from California's partnership with Apple to invest millions of dollars in solar energy, to Panasonic's remarkable work in energy efficiency in New Jersey, to Siemens' partnership with the University of Delaware down in one of our coastal towns, Lewis, to help create wind energy. We have seen that not only our economic prosperity and clean energy are not at odds, but rather they are complementary and mutually beneficial. This is the clean energy curve we must accelerate into. In the process of that acceleration, we must keep the worker at the center of our thinking. Because while we talk often about the future of work in the context of future workers, we can't forget about those workers whose jobs might not be returning after this pandemic. In Delaware, we're taking $10 million from the CARES Act to focus on helping those workers find new jobs. And we know that the clean energy sector is one of the best opportunities to do just that. That retraining must be broader than simply teaching new skills, however. We need wraparound supports that factor in things like transportation and also soft skills development so that these workers can thrive. We need training programs that focus on differently abled workers who research has shown bring unique and needed skills to the table. It's not enough, however, to ask the private sector to make these investments and shoulder the burden of these changes. In each of these cases, and many more across the country, we have seen public-private partnerships lead the way. It's time. We do that at scale and at the federal level. I'm going to say that one more time. It's time that we do this at scale and on the federal level. We in Congress must put our money where our mouth is. It's time that we make a truly transformative investment in infrastructure to improve not only our roads and bridges, but to invest in broadband technology and clean energy. We must incentivize programs and policies that reward private entities who accelerate into that clean energy curve. It's why I've introduced measures in Congress to, number one, incentivize upgrading public buildings with energy efficient solutions. Two, measures to help our nation's ports create environmental sustainability plans. And three, measures to make environmental justice communities who bore the brunt of our last economic revolution and put them as an equal partner in this one. While the opportunities ahead of us are exciting, it would be foolish to pretend that these changes are easy. The inertia of our current political and economic systems would lead us to simply endure whatever change is coming, rather than create a new path. The path of least resistance would be to go through this next economic revolution as we did in ones before, where rapid growth gives way to growing inequality, where short-term profits trump long-term prosperity, and where we travel around the curve of change with fits and starts. The nature of our challenge today is more unique and consequential than the challenges which have come before. But so too is the scope of our opportunity. If we keep our foot on the proverbial gas, make the bold and substantial investments we need to, and create the kind of meaningful partnerships that lead to real innovation, there's nothing beyond our grasp. We can say we not only survived this pandemic, but we also built a truly inclusive and sustainable economy that we'll be proud to pass down to our children and their children to come. That in a period of unparalleled challenge, we created unparalleled prosperity. We accelerated into a clean energy future, and we did it together. Thank you.
What time do we want to come back?
Ladies and gentlemen, the program will continue in 10 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, the program will resume in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our program. Now, please welcome Alberto Diaz, Managing Director of LAX at United Airlines, to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Sherwood-Randall.
Hi there. My name is Alberto Diaz. I'm the General Manager here at LAX for United Airlines. It's a pleasure here to be with you today on behalf of our employees here at LAX and our 90,000 employees across the system. The last 6 months I know has been incredibly challenging for everybody. So I hope that everybody is staying healthy, safe, and strong out there. We've had a long time. We've had roughly 6 months to come up with new and innovative ways to clean the airport, clean the airplanes, keep everybody safe, employees, passengers alike. And we've gone through several iterations of that. And you'll find that, our United Clean Plus program with the Cleveland Clinic and the Clorox Corporation has been good. And when you show up to the airport, I think you're going to be impressed when you're finally ready to fly. We're ready to welcome you back. The airport is pretty much spotless. The security lines are wide open right now. And of course, there's plexiglass barriers between employees, there's touchless kiosks, there's electrostatic spraying going on the airplanes every time the airplane comes in and out of the gate, among other things. And we hope to keep innovating with that. Also, just a little known fact though, just want to reiterate, this has been in the media a little bit, that the air in the airplane does replenish, so to speak. So every 3 to 5 minutes, we get a brand new batch of air that's being routed through the HEPA filters and then out through outflow valves in the back. So it's not recycled air for 5 hours on an airplane. So we hope to see you and hope that you feel comfortable and ready to fly when the time comes. We also have a big emphasis talking about energy and sustainability. We do go through a lot of energy, a lot of fossil fuels, so to speak. And one of our big emphasis items has been to look at biofuels. And so we've made some investments in biofuel. We dedicated, we committed to burning through using 10 million gallons of fuel, which sounds like a lot. It's still a small percentage of all of our total fuel that we use, just because of the availability of it. But we have partnered with several companies to do that here locally in LA, and we've actually flown a few airplanes that have been solely on biofuel. And that does represent a 60% drop in greenhouse gases when we do that. So we continue to do that. We continue to look for new ways of electrifying our vehicles and getting more compliant with all of our emissions and everything here in LA. So we have employee buses and airplane tugs and ground vehicles, belt loaders, and we're constantly looking for electrifying that equipment. And we've done 40% of our equipment is electrified to date. We also, you've been interested to hear that we have invested $30 million in Fulcrum Bioenergy, which is a company that actually turns waste at a landfill into Jet A out of that process. And of course, that's still in its infancy, but we look to keep partnering with them and see if we can make a difference for the environment and just be good citizens. So today, I'll go ahead and introduce, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Sherwood-Randall. And she's got quite an impressive resume. It doesn't look a day over 25, so I'm not sure how she did all these things that she's done in this resume, but it is my pleasure to introduce her. She's currently teaching at Georgia Tech. She's a senior fellow at the Strategic Energy Institute of Georgia Tech, and she served as Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Energy from 2014 through 2017. In the Obama administration, she served as Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director of European Affairs at the National Security Council. She also worked at Stanford University, Harvard University, and at the Council of Foreign Relations. And in the Clinton administration, she served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia from 1994 to 1996. And she'll be speaking to us today about securing our energy and climate future. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sherwood-Randall.
Thank you, Alberto. Can you see me?
I think we got you. We can see you.
Excellent. All right. Hello, everybody. It's an honor and a huge pleasure to be here with you today. You may not know this, but I was born and raised in Los Angeles, and my home in my heart is still on Coldwater Canyon, where I grew up surrounded by avocado and orange trees. I appreciate being invited to join you, and I also want to express my appreciation to Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester, who spoke so compellingly to us about accelerating into the curve. Thank you, Congresswoman, for the important work you do to advance sustainability and environmental justice issues in Congress. We need more like you. Today, California is on the front lines dealing with the effects of climate change. The most extreme fires in our state's history have burned over 3 million acres this summer. With the hottest weather, rolling blackouts, and scorched earth, we know from living here what this means and why this challenge to our planet is so urgent. And just as we're facing these catastrophic effects, we can also be proud that we're pacing the nation in advancing climate and clean energy policies. In Los Angeles, my friend and colleague, Mayor Eric Garcetti, has led vitally important efforts to drive climate action as the co-founder and chair of Climate Mayors, a cooperative bipartisan network of US mayors. And as the chair of C40 Cities, he also leads an international group of 96 cities committed to creating a more sustainable future through bold climate action, despite the retrograde policies of the Trump administration. But cities and states cannot solve the global climate challenge alone. We urgently need strong federal leadership in the form of a comprehensive plan that fully integrates our clean energy, climate, economic, and national security goals. Since our time today is short, let me sketch for you a set of guiding principles that I've developed in thinking about the kind of approach we need to take nationally. They're straightforward principles. First, everything we do must be science-based. Second, we need to develop all the tools that can contribute to radically reducing carbon emissions so that we can meet our net zero emissions goals by mid-century. That means we shouldn't now try to pick technology favorites. We should generate optionality because the needs of different cities, states, regions, and countries will be varied, and we need the widest array of possibilities to ensure rapid deployment. Third, on that rapid deployment point, we need to move fast. And fourth, we need to deliberately integrate energy security into everything that we do for ourselves and for our allies and partners. And we need to keep an eye on the actions of our rivals. Fifth, we also need to deliberately integrate considerations of social equity, inclusive opportunity, and climate justice into everything we do. And in particular, we need to focus on what we can do to cushion the impacts of climate change and of the clean energy transition on those who will be most directly affected. So with those principles set forth, I'd like to discuss what I believe must be the key pillars of a national strategy to deal with our intertwined energy, climate, and security challenges. I'll highlight areas that deserve particular attention, including 4 major lines of effort: improving energy efficiency, investing in innovation that grows jobs and enables a low carbon future, modernizing our power grid for the full spectrum of challenges that it must meet, and strengthening our domestic and international partnerships. In some ways, energy efficiency represents the easiest thing that we can all do. According to the California report done in 2019 by the not-for-profit Energy Futures Initiative, on whose board I serve, energy efficiency improvements are, quote, likely to be the most cost-effective approach to decarbonization in the energy end-use sectors, unquote. We're already making headway on our ambitious target of doubling economy-wide energy efficiency to help meet 2030 decarbonization targets. For example, California's Building Efficiency Program has allowed households to operate 30% more efficiently than the nationwide average, enabling a reduction in carbon dioxide emissions by 700,000 tons over the next 3 years. Building on this progress, we should immediately reinstate the guidelines that were established in the Obama administration for vehicle emissions and light bulbs and other consumer goods, but which were canceled by the current administration. Those requirements were not only changing our energy profile at home, but ensuring that American companies could compete effectively in global markets for more efficient products. Looking ahead, there are a number of especially promising avenues for improving energy efficiency and reducing emissions. These include increasing vehicle fuel efficiency even further, deploying demand response mechanisms in the electricity, transport, and building sectors, developing and promoting more efficient end-use technologies, and utilizing smart systems and other measures which reduce energy consumption. These efforts are also good for the American worker. Investing in energy efficiency has contributed to job growth in the United States and added over 400,000 new jobs in the last 5 years. And this brings me to a crucial point. Investments in clean energy innovation support economic opportunity and will strengthen the position of US goods and services in international markets. Deployment of new energy technologies has driven job growth in the US energy sector over the last decade at a pace that is double the national average. Clean energy jobs generally have higher wages, and they also tend to be more attainable for those without a college degree. Overall, there is huge potential for good paying energy jobs in this country, which is all the more reason to invest in clean energy innovation and technology. To generate these jobs, we will need to launch a full-scale assault on reaching a deeply decarbonized economy by mid-century. And we need to do this globally, not just at home. A recent Energy Futures Initiative and IHS Market report provided a useful roadmap identifying key technologies with breakthrough potential to help us to reduce emissions. These include improved batteries and large-scale storage, industrial processes that better manage heat and materials, advanced nuclear reactors, systems innovation, including electric grid modernization, and large-scale carbon management, including carbon removal from the atmosphere. Also, we need to invest in the cross-cutting platforms that support this innovation, including advanced computing capabilities. When I was the Deputy Secretary at the Energy Department, it was exhilarating to visit our 17 national laboratories, the jewels in the crown of our federal innovation ecosystem, and to experience firsthand the innovation that they make possible for the American people and the world. Just in case you're a Californian watching this and you didn't know it, there are 4 of these amazing national labs in our state and a 5th in Santa Barbara that is associated with DOE. Federal investment in our labs has the power to launch new solutions across energy, climate, and security challenges. It's already working in Los Angeles, where the Department of Water and Power is partnering with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory to figure out how to meet the very ambitious goal the city has set of 100% renewable energy supply by 2045. The study, called LA 100, will provide just the kind of system-wide look we need to undertake all across our country at what it will require to power a major metropolitan area reliably with new renewable energy, along with targets for greater electrification of buildings and vehicles. It will also look at the impacts on the economy and on specific communities. More broadly, as the International Energy Agency has observed, roughly half of the reductions needed to quickly achieve net zero emissions in the coming decades must come from technologies that have not yet been brought to market. They may not have even been invented yet. And as I said at the outset of these remarks, the pace of our work really matters, because as the science and our own personal experiences are telling us, our planet is warming faster than was previously anticipated. And so we need to act even faster to avert the pernicious consequences and set ourselves on a positive trajectory. The Columbia University Center on Global Energy Policy is about to publish an excellent new report called Energizing America that I'll participate in launching the day after tomorrow. It concludes that 40 out of 46 critical technologies needed to realize the clean energy transition are not on track today to meet the goal of a deeply decarbonized planet by 2050. Therefore, a stark reality, even in a COVID-19 constrained fiscal environment, is that we absolutely must ramp up federal funding for clean energy innovation, strategically invested This will be an engine of our economy and will position us to lead the world again. I want to say something specific about the aging electric grid because, as we Californians know all too well, stresses on the grid are increasing and they are disrupting our lives and our economic productivity. As temperatures rose this summer, people all across our region turned up their air conditioning and grid operators were unable to respond to record high demand. The resulting rolling blackouts left millions of homes without power. And with forests getting drier, PG&E and other utilities are relying on forced blackouts to avoid sparking mass wildfires. There's much more we can do to reduce the frequency and severity of these threats and ultimately build a cleaner, more resilient grid that can meet our needs. First, we need to modernize our infrastructure. This involves a variety of initiatives, such as expanding our investments in battery storage to ensure the grid can meet peak demand loads and deliberately investing in large-scale grid modernization initiatives, from fully deploying a smart metering network that can improve transmission efficiency and distribution management to ensuring that the grid of the future can withstand escalating cyber intrusions. Second, we need to face the reality that the segmented grid we have inherited is not the future grid that we need. Scientists in the DOE lab system have determined that working toward the establishment of an integrated national grid could enable us to manage the sort of heat wave-induced blackouts that we have just endured. An expanded grid would enable California to send its excess solar power east during the day, and for large Midwestern wind farms to send power westward when the sun is down, aligning supplies with demand. Not only would a supergrid promote renewables and increase grid reliability, it could also lower prices for consumers through increased competition among power companies. However, this research has not been brought forward for action in the last few years, and that is to our collective detriment. Its conclusions should be recognized and a long-term implementation plan should be developed. As I already observed, we also know that a more integrated grid can introduce additional security threats that we must guard against. It's imperative that as we modernize our grid with new technologies, we also engineer in the solutions that will harden it. To borrow from the language of hardening that we use to describe the no-fail infrastructure associated with our nuclear deterrent. We also need to be planning, preparing, exercising, and training to manage a wide range of threat scenarios, from natural disasters and physical attacks to cyber attacks on our grid. And a coordinated response is essential, so we have to ensure increased cooperation at all levels of government with the private sector to maximize the security and resilience of that critical infrastructure. This call for cooperation leads me to close by underscoring the importance of building and sustaining partnerships in all that we do. We cannot generate accelerated sustainable change in our massive energy system without doing the hard work of building broad coalitions. Very early in my career, when I was a young advisor to then Senator Joe Biden, he gave me a piece of wise advice. He told me that in developing solutions, we must search for common ground, even with those with whom we most strongly disagree. And we need to focus less on what divides us and more on what unites us. There is no way we can meet our climate goals unless we build those kinds of broad coalitions and persuade skeptics to appreciate that the effects of climate change do not discriminate according to political persuasion, and that they will benefit in multiple dimensions from a cleaner energy future. To that end, we need to work to bring together the public and private sectors, labor and business, non-governmental organizations and financial institutions, religious and military leaders, blue states and red states. A good example of the kind of partnership that will be essential is the work that I led to strengthen emergency preparedness and response capabilities with the utilities that power the American way of life. I knew we would need to enhance information and intelligence sharing to keep our critical infrastructure protected against emerging threats, and that we needed to develop a plan for a clean energy transition that would ensure accessibility, affordability, reliability, and resilience against all hazards to the grid. This work is obviously not done. Truth be told, Some of the challenges that California is facing result from failing to approach this transition as a systems level problem that requires thorough planning and execution to maintain reliability and manage risk. More broadly, our international allies and partners are crucial to our overall success. Like a spreading pandemic, climate change knows no borders. So we have a major stake in choices made by other countries, especially those that are on an upward development trajectory. However, it's obvious that we will have some serious work to do on this front. Our credibility on climate issues has been badly damaged by the science denial of this administration, as well as by our abrupt withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement and our cessation of all government-to-government international climate collaboration. We'll need to work hard to rebuild the enduring global partnerships that guarantee our energy and our national security. What we can bring to the table again is our innovation power, the power that drives solutions to accelerating climate challenges, to evolving energy needs, and to rising security threats. Of special import will be bringing our energy technology toolkit to the developing world, where the choices that will be made about electrification for hundreds of millions of people will have profound consequences for the whole planet. Our involvement overseas also presents opportunities for US companies to expand business and create good-paying American jobs in the clean energy sector. And geostrategically, we need to renew our support for our allies and partners in securing their energy supplies, particularly from sources that enhance their security and support their clean energy transitions. Our withdrawal from the international climate and clean energy discussion has been detrimental to both our national security and our economy. When the United States abandoned the international order that we helped to create, others, particularly China, have stepped in to fill the void, most notably through the Belt and Road Initiative. In 2017, China's two largest policy banks provided as much energy financing to other countries as all the multilateral development banks combined. Most of that went towards coal or other fossil fuel projects. China and other countries receiving its Belt and Road financing make up almost half of global CO2 emissions. American engagement overseas offers a meaningful choice to countries seeking electrification, modernized energy infrastructure, and cleaner and more secure power generation, transmission, and distribution. Of course, getting our own house in order will be the necessary precondition to restoring trust in us as a reliable partner and to rebuilding confidence in our leadership. Ambitious domestic climate action, starting with adopting an aggressive national clean energy and climate policy with a series of bold actions on day one of a new administration, would signal our commitment to doing our part, curb our emissions, and invest in clean energy solutions for ourselves and the world we live in. The climate crisis and its interwoven security concerns present a challenge unlike anything we have faced as a planet. Early in my career, I worked on reducing the risks of nuclear proliferation that resulted from the collapsing Soviet empire. There was no roadmap. There was no precedent for what we faced. But through leadership and ingenuity and strong international partnerships, we were able to achieve game-changing results. Bill Perry, the Secretary of Defense at the time, and also a proud Californian, always reminded us, the hardest problems are the ones that are the most worth working on. The same is true for us today. Climate change is one of the greatest challenges of our lifetimes, and our collective focus, as reflected in this summit that you are convening here today, is profoundly important. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you, and I hope that you will each use what you take away from these 2 days to inform your decisive actions in the crucial weeks, months, and years ahead.
Joining us now is tonight's featured panel, Moving Towards 100% Renewable Energy and Resource Adequacy, moderated by LA Times energy reporter Sammy Roth.
All right, I think I'm on here. Thanks everyone for being here tonight. I'm very excited about this panel. The topic that we're discussing, moving California to 100% renewable energy while maintaining reliability and adequacy of our power system. It's a especially important topic, I think, right at this moment. We have just faced these wildfire crises that are ongoing. We have these heat waves that are challenging the power system and making it difficult to keep the lights on at times. These are challenges that are both exacerbated by climate change and also challenges that speak to the importance of cleaning up the grid and moving to 100% clean power. It's also an interesting moment because California has this goal of 100% climate-friendly electricity by 2045, but there's discussion that's ongoing right now. Governor Newsom last week commented that he thinks 2045 is not soon enough, which is really interesting because until quite recently that was seen as a very ambitious goal, and now the conversation seems to be moving past that. So really excited to talk about all of these issues. We have a great set of panelists here, and I'd love to just ask them each to introduce themselves, and then I'll have some questions. So maybe in the order we've got here, if our panelists wouldn't mind just briefly saying hello.
Hi, I'm Marty Adams. I'm the General Manager and Chief Engineer at the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power.
Tom, are you there?
I am. Good evening. I'm Tom Whitcomb, founder and CEO of 8 Minutes Solar Energy.
All right, and I think Mike is here somewhere. I'm still looking to see how I can see everybody. Is Mike in the room here? Do we have Mike? Not sure about Mike, but we've got Carla, of course, from Edison. Hey, Carla.
Hi, everyone. Carla Peterman, Senior Vice President of Strategy and Regulatory Affairs at Edison, Southern California Edison. And I wish I had a cool background like Tom.
Yeah, Tom's background is pretty good. And Commissioner Randall, if you have a background there, I think that's the PUC building, right?
That is, in fact, the PUC building at the corner of Van Ness and Golden Gate. So I am Leanne Randolph. I'm the Commissioner at the California Public Utilities Commission.
And I think Mike is on the call now too. Mike, are you there? Well, maybe Mike will be able to join us as we get started, as that gets worked out. I think the place that I want to start is this question about 2045 and when do we really need to have our grid totally cleaned up? As I said, there's discussion from the governor now that 2045 is waiting too long. Joe Biden has a climate plan that has a 2035 date in it for meeting that target. Just to start by, I guess, putting you all on the spot on a very difficult question. Very interested what you would say is when should we be targeting as a state 100% clean energy? What is a date that is both feasible and also up to the challenge we face if 2045 is too long to wait? What do you all think? Whoever wants to start with that one, it's a big one.
I can start. I'll just say, from the perspective of a regulator implementing state law, we are have a very clear mandate to move to 100% by 2045. So that is what our planning is about. And in terms of whether or not to go faster or slower, I think the reality is that it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take a lot of steel in the ground. And we need to be pushing those projects, moving the procurement, working toward those goals, full speed ahead, regardless of whether we're talking 2035, 2045. I will also say that this is really an economy-wide question, and the next scoping plan that that CARB will adopt will be informative, because we really need to be thinking about meeting our climate goals in terms of the entire economy and powering our transportation sector. And if we're going to meet our climate goals, we're going to need an electrified transportation system. So we need to build a grid that meets that additional demand. And that may cause us to, go closer to 2045 than sooner. So I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind.
I'm going to want to follow up on the steel in the ground and also the what are we asking of the power sector questions, but I'll let some other folks on the panel weigh in first.
Sammy, mic's on if you can hear me.
Yes, I can, Mike. Do you want to tackle this one?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm Mike Garland. I'm CEO and founder of Pattern Energy Group, one of the largest private renewable companies. We do wind, solar, storage, transmission in North America and in Japan. Steel in the ground is our game. We love it. I think it's really a matter of government will and leadership, and I think LADWP certainly in LA is showing that type of leadership. But when you look at the components that are needed to get steel in the ground at the level that you're talking about, 100% clean by 45, the costs are down there. Cost for renewables is cheap or very inexpensive, 2 cents to 4 or 5 cents, and that's some of the lowest cost in our history. There's universal support. The technology is available for 100%, both in the type of renewable equipment needed as well as grid improvements. And obviously the evidence for the need to move quickly is here with the fires and the storms in the Southeast. And to me, I think you'll probably get into this, but I think the critical next step is to talk about the need for a robust grid, a grid that can accommodate that level of growth into integration. And that's a huge effort on the part of the utilities to be able to, and grid integrators to be able to get this level of penetration of renewables into the system. But the technology there, I think companies like Tom's and ours are ready to do and accelerate our development activities. I know that to meet that level, we'll need about 150,000 megawatts of new wind and solar coming into the California system. And I think the industry is ready to gear up for it, particularly depending on the politics that come about and the will of government to make it happen.
So we have one vote so far for 2045 is pretty ambitious. One vote for it's a question of government will. Who else wants to weigh in?
I'll say, first of all, if I can do I didn't do my disclaimer at the start of this panel, which is in my comments, I may touch upon some active CPUC proceedings, particularly the resource adequacy and integrated resource planning proceeding. And so if I do, given that we have a decision maker on the panel, I will follow up with the appropriate ex parte filings.
Thank you, Carla.
So with that being said, maybe I'll add another word to it. I think 2045 goals are necessary. I mean, this is all with the intention of managing climate change and staying under 2 degrees. And the electric sector has a critical role to play. And so I think the targets are appropriate for our sector. At SCE, we'd like to see certain milestones moved up. So we would advocate for more aggressive near-term targets in terms of greenhouse gas reductions. And that builds upon the last of the comments from Mike about the importance of getting procurement and steel in the ground. And so the sooner we can have more aggressive targets to work towards over the next few years, then that provides more opportunity and a little bit more runway for us to do the necessary procurement.
When you say moving up emissions targets, do you mean like the 40% reduction by 2030, moving that up, or what are you thinking about?
No, more in order to get to that 40% reduction by 2030, we've got to plan our procurement to get to a certain greenhouse gas reduction level. And so we advocate for a lower planning target in our PUC proceedings than we currently have. And so right now, the utilities are putting forward portfolios for procurement that reflect a couple different levels of greenhouse gas reductions. And we would say target the highest level of reductions, just to make sure that we're able to get all the procurement done in time for 2030. So maybe I'll have a hybrid answer, which is 2045 is necessary, 2030 is necessary, but it's aggressive. And so we'd like to get that procurement going.
Tom, it looked like you were gonna weigh in here.
Yeah, and I see Marty. By the way, I think you have the best title, Marty, Chief Engineer. I love that. It's going to take a lot of engineers to get us there. And I think You know, honestly, I think 2045 is comfortably doable. 35 is aggressive, but I think targets have to be aggressive, right? If you look at the last 10 years, what we've done in California, 10 years ago, people said, 20% RPS was undoable. The lights are going to flicker. 33%, we've surpassed that now. So I think we can do it. I mean, this is the most innovative state in the most innovative country in the world. And I think let's not forget about the technologies and the integration, battery energy storage systems, software, the grid of the next century. All of that is a huge opportunity. The technologies are there. We've got to figure out how to do it. It's not technology really that's holding us back. It's Marty will agree with that, transmission, right? We're going to have to, think about ways how to get this power in. Our system was built around fossil fuel plants, and it was not built around renewables. But there's, again, technological solutions that allow us to utilize existing transmission much more effectively. There's DC lines. There's a lot of work ahead, but can it be done in 10 or 15 years? I think, yes. Do we have to hit exactly 100? I think, as Carla was saying, this is overall decarbonization. It's not just, do I get the last 5% of the grid? But it is, do I have a really meaningful impact in terms of driving carbon down and really fighting climate change? And we need to look at it holistically. I think in terms of carbon reduction goals, I don't see any reason why we could not hit that in 10 to 15 years.
Hit what in 10 to 15 years?
Reducing the equivalent carbon to 100% clean grid.
I see. Marty, I'll add in quickly here before you answer the question. I'll just point out DWP is doing this comprehensive study right now, as I understand it, with NREL, of trying to figure out, what does the mix in 2045 look like? And I think as part of that study, they've also been looking at a 2035 mix and how that would affect the cost and the timeline. So just pointing that out before you answer the question.
Yeah, so we've been working toward 2045, and there's a lot of things here you have to really kind of think about. I mean, first of all, is it 100% renewable or is it 100% carbon free, which are not the same things. And the other thing that you look at, I mean, as you try to edge toward 100% of anything, that when you get to 80%, you can do it. You get to 90%, getting tougher. That last 10% could be very difficult and can be very expensive. And one of the key things we have to look about is what's the affordability, because as you move faster, you're going to also have to look at the impacts on the folks that have to pay the rates for the power system. So everybody wants clean energy, wants a clean future. At the same time, we have to do it in a way that doesn't break the bank. As Tom mentioned, we have a lot of transmission to build and wires to connect areas because a lot of this renewable energy is not where the customers are. We're actually really reaching further outside of the metropolitan areas for energy. We've got to get that energy in. We've got to move it around the system correctly. And we have to be able to withstand things like wildfires that take out transmission lines and other things that cause outages. And the one thing I always think about is say 100%, is it 100% every second of every day or 100% when everything's running normally? Because that's a big difference, because the biggest thing that we see as a challenge with renewables is how do you store energy? And we see it on a regular hot day as it is. We'll have more energy storage capability. We're working with Tom's company on Elan Solar and storage project, be the biggest project of its kind in the country. We have other projects coming on with major battery storage, and those are good for day in and day out. But if we have a sustained heat storm like we did the last few weeks, we have a major outage. We have a super cloud cover come over that we saw a couple years ago in August when we set new highs, and the weather was hot and muggy and cloudy. This battery storage is not going to cut it. And so, is there a backup so you have reliable power during that time as well? So is 100% when everything's fine? Is 100% every second of every day forever? Those are very big, big questions and very different answers to that. My job is to keep the lights on and make sure people can afford to have electricity at their house.
So that's actually a good segue, because I want to get into some more of these specific solutions being discussed. But before we do that, on this question of keeping the lights on, I mean, obviously very relevant right now. Tom, you made the point that people used to say, 20% RPS and you'll have the lights flicker. Obviously that didn't happen, but last month we did in fact as a state have these 2 instances on these hot evenings of rotating power outages. Been a lot of sort of debate and hand-wringing over, what was the cause of this or what were the causes. Doesn't really seem like, oh, this was a, renewables problem necessarily, but definitely seems to be a, part of this transition that we're undergoing where the power system is changing. How do we have this conversation about getting to 100% renewables and, potentially speeding up the timeline at a point when probably, politically speaking and among the public, and those 2 points are related, people are going to be really concerned about keeping the lights on and about this happening again. I mean, how do we talk about this, and how do we work through that, from a planning and sort of politics perspective? And I open that up to anyone who wants to weigh in on that question.
I'm happy to. You'd like me to, Sammy?
Yeah, go ahead,
Mike.
From our perspective, I think one of the things that help in this is the bigger picture of the regional grid, what people are calling the Western grid. The more breadth you have that the grid is operating in, and I completely agree with Marty's comment about the cost curve going way up in the last 10, 20%, but I think if you spread out the supply and the way electrons can get to regions, it would really help tremendously fight some of these things. The second is obviously we have to, I'm a PG&E customer, and candidly, a lot of the trouble up north is to do with not maintaining the transmission grid properly at the levels we need to in a drought-oriented forest and landscape environment. And so I think that if we think more regionally as what the grid can provide in terms of balance. And remember, the grid's a little bit, the way I describe the transmission and even distribution grid, it's mostly AC. And that's more like a flooding a field, right? If you think of this as water as opposed to electrons, it's like flooding a field. Water will go to the lowest area and flood one area, and it'll be dry in another area because it's a different level. The more you can integrate the system to be able to move the electrons around, like moving in a field, the irrigation, the more you can manage and balance the system to be accommodating in these in challenging times. Secondly, I'm reasonably supportive of the concept of mid or micro grids, where you start designing over time grid systems that allow for, if you have a solar or wind project, to be able to supply locally in times of emergency. For example, we have a project in Puerto Rico where when the storm came through and knocked out their backbone, it basically shut the whole island down. But our wind project was available to operate as soon as the storm passed. It was a day or two later. And had we been able to turn on and have the right electrical system set up to allow us to feed the local community of St. Isabel and Ponce, we could have supplied almost everybody electricity following the outage. So I think there are ways to try to manage the grid in a localized version as well. It's a little different thinking than what we've thought about in the traditional utility systems, but I'm a big believer in both the big regional solution as well as mid and local solutions to balance in the grid.
Sammy, I can chime in on this one.
Yeah, go for it.
So I appreciate you acknowledging, and you're right, that the power challenges that we saw last month were contributable to a host of factors. And so not one in particular, but it's a good opportunity for us to look at our reliability regime and think about how do we make sure, as you said, we keep the lights on while also increasing our use of renewables and low carbon technologies. Based on our analysis, and we've modeled economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions and targets for 2045 with a particular focus on the electric sector. And we do think that you can meet the 2045 greenhouse gas reduction goals primarily with technologies that we have available to us now, renewables, storage, and some use of natural gas plants. And so as we look ahead, first of all, we have to make sure, again, that we're procuring enough resources, and we advocate for more procurement over the next several years. And we also need to take a look at our framework for providing reliability. these resources are different. Renewables are different. And so our resource adequacy construct may have worked for other resources, but may need to evolve. So for example, really focusing on those critical, 2 to 4 hours a day in the evening when you have solar coming down the system, but you still have high load, making sure that we're able to meet that need and not just peak need. I think we also could warrant having a conversation about what level of reliability we want to have as a society. We've been planning, this gets to what do we plan for, right? We can plan for something different. We've been planning for a loss of load for 1 in every 10 years, but actually haven't had to experience that because we've had more margin in the system. But as we're having less resources on the grid or more variable resources, we can consider, do we want to plan for a lower loss of load, 1 every 15 years, 1 in every 20 years? That might be a factor of we're using more electricity. If we're powering our cars, our buildings, the cost of loss of load may be higher. So I think we have to look at that. And if we plan differently, if we're planning for something else, then we're going to buy for something else and we're be procuring towards that target. But I do want to frame though that if we're going to be procuring more, planning to higher reliability targets, there is a cost impact. And I think Marty touched upon this. And we got to make sure that our power is affordable to our customers. And so, one of the things I'll highlight from our study is that we still keep about 10 gigawatts of natural gas plants on the system, running about 40% low carbon fuels. And doing that in 2045 reduces the overall cost of meeting the system needs by 40%. So you can keep a small amount of generation gas facilities online, decarbonizing, and really have a cost impact. So those are some of the trade-offs we're going to need to be thinking about as we march our way towards that 2045 target.
A couple of things you said really caught my attention, but one in particular, the point about what happens as we electrify more parts of the economy. Obviously, this is something Edison's been pretty out front on, being favorable towards strong electrification of not only transportation but buildings. So I thought your comment that if we do that in a big way, and if we have more of our society relying on the electric grid, that we might even need to have higher reliability expectations. I thought that was really interesting, just because I think that's one of the sort of big question marks, around electrification is, people are kind of wary about, is the grid reliable right now, and do we want to power more of our society based on it? So I think that's going to be an important conversation, probably.
And Sam, I just add, I don't think it doesn't have to be costly, right? I don't want to say that to meet that, you've got to build a bunch of power plants. We saw a lot of great response from demand response during these outages. We had 1,000 megawatts of reduction in load. And so how do you utilize, if customers are using more electricity, they all don't need it at those hours, right? How do we really capture that resource? So it doesn't have to be necessarily that more expensive. It just has to be intentional. And pardon me for interrupting. I think I interrupted the commissioner.
No, that's okay.
I was actually going to say the same thing. As a few moments ago, I was all steel in the ground, but it's more than just steel in the ground. To Carla's point, we did see an excellent response from a lot of large consumers, literally voluntarily dropping their load to meet the heat storm, particularly in September. So, we need to think about better ways to harness that through our demand response programs, kind of update our demand response programs, make them more effective. And on the procurement standpoint, the procurement landscape is very different than it was 20 years ago. Back in the day, it was, us telling the 3 big IOUs, this is what you need to buy. And that world is different. We have a lot more load serving entities. We have community choice aggregators who are partially regulated by us, partially not. And all of those entities file their integrated resource plans. And this last time around, as you know, Sammy, we told them to plan to the 46 million metric ton and the 38 million metric ton, share those plans with us. But at the end of the day, those LSEs need to go out and procure those resources. And they are doing a lot of procurement. I mean, there is procurement going on. We have upwards of 15 different programs where LSEs are procuring, anywhere from the original storage mandate that Carla spearheaded when she was a commissioner at the PUC, additional storage that we have ordered in the intervening years. All of that storage is not online yet. That is still in the hopper. So that'll be coming online. That will help. The additional procurement we ordered last year is going to be coming online. We still have LSEs who are doing longer term contracts to meet their RPS obligations. So there is procurement going on. We just need to keep working the problem and be creative in our solutions around things like demand response and other programs.
So I want to follow up on that point, and thank you, Commissioner Randall, for bringing up demand response, and as well, because that's something I definitely wanted to bring into this conversation. On the question of procurement, though, and on planning, I mean, I think a criticism that I've definitely heard quite a bit over the last month. I mean, this was the sort of criticism that the independent system operator came out with after the rolling outages. Is this suggestion that the PUC, has not been prepared for a moment like this and has not planned adequately, for a situation like the heat waves that we had over the last few weeks. And I think that with regards to some of the storage that you were describing, this, order of additional procurement that was done last year, I mean, that was sort of a little bit of a last minute thing where we were hitting these deadlines for shutting down these gas, once through cooled facilities that were supposed to shut down in 2020, and it was sort of realized that that was not going to be feasible. So the commission, made this sort of big procurement order and asked for the deadlines to be extended a few years. So I guess I'm hoping you can respond to this this criticism or this idea that the PUC needs to be planning for this more robustly and getting out ahead of some of these problems, potentially through ordering more procurement, but possibly in other ways.
So, as you know, the three agencies are working on a root cause analysis report for trying to understand what happened in August. And so we will absolutely be completing that. I think we need to keep looking at our planning processes. As Carla mentioned, we need to look at resource adequacy and see whether we need to make changes in that area. And these are things we have been talking about for quite some time. It's important to note that the renewables are much more cost effective. So when you have an abundance of resources, the old fossil fuel generators can't necessarily compete on price with the cheaper renewables, and so they may not stay around. So I think we do need to be aggressive in making sure that we have a sufficient amount of renewables to take their place. And so that is what we are working on right now.
So I just wanted to throw something in there, which, we talked a lot about planning. I think we should also talk about dreaming. And this is not meant in a fascist, in a funny kind of a way. But we're entering a new era. This is the first time in the history of energy that a semiconductor technology has entered the energy sector. This has not happened before. We have a silicon chip that is producing electricity. We have battery energy storage systems with massive amounts of semiconductors that react in milliseconds, not in minutes or hours like traditional power plants. We can completely redesign the system. We're now at a point where, using Eland as an example, we're below 2 cents a kilowatt hour for solar and below 4 cents for solar plus massive storage. We're now cheaper. We're now more reliable. This is like having a debate if we should extend our telephone network when we had dial-up modems. Nobody thinks back to those painful days anymore. There is a transition that requires a lot of infrastructure to be built. To Marty's point about, transmission is important. We got to get the electrons there. I think we already have an imbalanced market. I'm not a big fan of regionalization, and here's the reason why, which is what we're doing in California is much bigger than the tons of CO2 that we are suppressing with renewables. What we're doing in California is we're showing the rest of the world and the rest of the country that you can build a clean grid. You can do this cost effectively, and you can create jobs, good paying jobs in the process, and run an economy more reliably on clean power than you can with fossil fuel. Is that a hard road ahead? Yes. But by showing that to the rest of the world, we will have a huge impact. Besides the fact that we will build a huge industry and economy out of it that we can start exporting. But a lot of the power plant designs that we're doing, the software we're developing, this is a very sophisticated technology now that we're deploying. This is not just throwing the solar panel out there in the desert and it produces electricity. These highly integrated systems, this is a new technology that California and the US can export to the rest of the world and do something really good with that. That's why I think dreaming about what we can do and what we will do, it's the same as in 1960, I forgot when it was, 1 or 2, when Kennedy said, let's go to the moon. We did not have the technology to do that when the announcement was made. So kind of planning around what is possible today limits our vision for realizing this dream, and this dream is absolutely necessary in terms of climate change. This is not, a fun thing to do. This is of strategic importance for our country and for our planet itself. So by taking a step back and thinking about what is possible, what can we do in the next 10 to 15 years, technology will evolve. You look at the solar technology from 10 years ago, it's laughable today. You look in 10 years from now, what we're doing today is going to be laughable in terms of technology and how we, give you an example. You see the panels behind me on the screen, right? Fake screen, obviously. Those panels were designed to fit on the German roof. That is the form factor of panels that we use in this power plant. We haven't even designed the panels for a highly efficient utility scale solar power plant. The batteries we're using today were made for laptops, which then Tesla and others used for cars, which we're now using for energy storage. So we're just at the very, very beginning here of this new technology revolution that is revolutionizing our entire energy sector. And what we can do with that in 10 to 15 years is going to blow all of us away. And so
I want to cut in here just for a minute. So since we're talking about technology, I think one of the biggest questions I have for you all, when you think about the technologies that are going to be needed to keep the grid balanced and to maintain reliability, how much of that do you all think can be done by building a lot more solar and wind and lithium-ion batteries, which is some of, but not all of what I think Tom is talking about? How much of it is this stuff that we already have and we're good at and is pretty cheap, and how much of reliability is going to require other technologies that are either still more expensive or might not be fully baked yet? And what are some of those technologies? So I'll open that up, and whoever wants to dive in, go right. Marty, you look like you have something.
I think, we can build a zillion megawatts of solar and wind. And if we don't have a way to store it for the peak demand every afternoon and evening, it won't make any difference at all. I mean, so our numbers will go up, but we won't get there unless we can store renewable energy. And so that's really the question. I know lithium batteries are out there. They'll get better. They have a role to play for a certain number of hours on a daily basis, providing there's enough energy to recharge them, enough clean energy to recharge them every day. But that's going to be the challenge. And I think we need, we're still going to need something that what we call dispatchable power, something you can call on right now. We're going to need something that we can hold on to for a longer period of time. We do have hydropower. In LA, we have our Castaic hydro plant, which is, I think, still the second largest battery of sorts in the country. And that, we use renewable energy to pump the water back up to Lake Pyramid. And then we generate in the evening when the sun goes down. We put 1,500 megawatts, about a quarter of all our peak demand, down back into Castaic Lake. And we generate, clean hydropower to keep the lights on. And so that's a great way to do that. That's a huge amount of storage to try to replicate by some of the technology. One of the things we're looking at is hydrogen. And of course, at Intermountain Power Plant, we're going from coal to gas on our way to hydrogen. And hydrogen is a possibility of having a clean fuel, a fuel that can be generated with renewable energy and can be stored in that location, potentially enough for maybe up to a year. And then we actually could have dispatchable, clean burning power, run a power plant like a power plant so it responds to demands. But again, if you look at all this, you're talking all these facilities that are a long way from the city. So one of the questions becomes, what do you have under your feet here in the city of Los Angeles or another city like us? If all your power is hundreds of miles away, you always have some reliability risks. And so we do need to also focus on generating power in the city and storing it in the city and in all cities, because that's a big piece of reliability. And microgrids and small scale storage will help on a day in and day out basis. But when it comes to a larger problem, a serious heat wave, some form of equipment outage or something else, and it's just like, you can't blame the last power outages and rolling blackouts on renewable energy. Renewable did exactly what it was supposed to do. But when the sun went down, the wind didn't blow, what was supposed to take its place? And that's where we need to fill the gap.
Anyone want to agree or disagree or different perspective?
I would, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, this is Carla, that I really welcome and appreciate and agree with Marty that it would be good to have some new resources in the mix. I mean, if we can have cost-effective hydrogen and cost-effective CCS, that'd be great to add to the toolkit. When we look at 2045, we do think that you can reach those targets with commercially available products now, primarily solar, some wind, and some battery storage. Because even if you need longer duration storage, our modeling still has us using 4-hour lithium-ion batteries in succession to get there. So I think that's a positive headline, which is technically we can get there. Now we're an opportunity to dream big, right? As Tom said, and see if there's other resources that we can bring online to enable us to do that as well.
Oh, absolutely. I think, hydrogen is an opportunity. There's other technologies, there's zinc air battery technologies that, have pros and cons compared to lithium ion. Lithium ion right now, like I said, it came out of the laptops into the cars, which is why we're using it, because there was an industry there that made them. At the time, we were too small to have our own industry making batteries for us in a cost-effective way. There's going to be more technologies. Just like, in my example, 10 years ago, we didn't think about 5G. We thought about, faster modems and whatever not, So if you told someone back then that we're going to have, a gigabit in speed over wireless, they would have laughed at you. So there's going to be a lot of technologies coming. I think what's important is to have the mindset that there is a solution out there. It's cost effective. And technology is our friend, and it can drive the cost down, and it could be clean. Let me challenge one more thing, which is, I actually don't think the question of 100% is the right question. I would rephrase that and say, let's set a target for 200%. What I mean by that is we come out of a world where we had to pay for fuel, right? That's why we said I have a certain amount of load, and let me figure out how I can serve that load, right? And when I hit 100%, I'm happy, I'm done, right? With a solar power plant, at a cost, our marginal cost right now is somewhere around 1.5 cents a kilowatt hour to add more solar to an existing power plant. At that cost, which is going to be half in 5 years, at that cost, I'm just going to overbuild my solar power plant. I'm just going to serve 200% of the load. And what do I do with the excess power? Well, first of all, if there's clouds, I don't have to worry because I can still serve the load because the solar power plant, even on a cloudy day, produces. But what do I do with the excess power? I make hydrogen, right? Which Marty said I can store seasonally. I can make clean water. The only difference between dirty water and clean water is energy. So if I now have free or near free energy, I can start thinking all kinds of stuff. If you look at where Amazon and the likes are building their new data centers, guess where? In the desert. Why? Because solar power is so cheap there. That's attracting new industries, et cetera. So 100% is not the right metric, but we're going to have to over-design the system, just like your internet speed at home is way more than you actually need most of the day, right? I mean, it's pretty rare that you actually max it out, right? we're just going to have to over-design the grid. It's a completely different mindset. The fuel is free. I don't care, right? Let's burn it. Let's burn the sunshine.
I have two follow-ups
So-
here. Oh, go ahead, yeah, Commissioner Randolph. I do want to bring you in, so yeah.
So I do think it's a very different mindset, and it's a fun engineering challenge by turning this upside down and saying, like, if I have free fuel and I have effectively free power, how do I build a system around that? We have to get away from this mindset of fossil fuel world and I have to burn stuff and pay for it, et cetera. So
let's let Commissioner Randolph, I think you want to weigh in here.
Yeah, I'll just add one of those kind of cautionary things, which is, as a former land use attorney, I could tell you that, today we are dealing with, land use battles over even renewable energy projects. And so that's one of the issues that we're talking about in the SB 100 report to the legislature that we're required to submit in January. So I think we need to be really clear-eyed. I was thinking about it as Marty was talking about pumped storage. Is there significant land use issues with pumped storage? And then there are still local land use battles over wind projects and solar projects. You still have counties that discourage the development of solar projects on former ag land. So, those are some of the kind of the big picture things we need to be thinking about in terms of trying to marshal all of the sort of, policy direction of the state towards achieving our climate goals. We have to be aware that there are these hurdles that happen time to time.
Sammy,
yeah, please.
One more thing on that.
Carla, go for it. I have some follow-up, but go for it.
Isn't a nice, we're not going to let you ignite.
You're muted now, Carly. You're muted.
See, that's what I get for us. I was like, oh, we're not going to let you get a word in, and I got muted. This is kind of a good follow-up to both the comments, which is there's also an opportunity to evolve our market rules just to better optimize the resources that we're putting in the ground now. Commissioner Randolph mentioned energy storage. And we've got about 200 megawatts of CAISO connected grid storage, but we're going to have 800 more next year once we get through the procurement that the PUC has already ordered. And we could be getting more out of our energy storage assets. And I think one of the things we tried initially was, let's just get storage on the system, but the market rules are set up for other types of resources. So there is work for us to do, probably in the more wonky, maybe less sexy space of thinking about market design and market rules. We're also doing new stuff with virtual power plants. So we've got a project with Sunrun. We're looking at how do we use the capacity of residential solar plus batteries to provide power to the grid during emergencies. So given land use constraints, given affordability concerns, we really also need to look at those opportunities as well.
Carla, on the virtual power plant, I did want to ask about that because I find that fascinating. I think what's perhaps most interesting to me about the partnership that Edison has with Sunrun that you mentioned is that traditionally the investor-owned utilities have been seen as being in this role of being, skeptical or anti, distributed resources and rooftop solar. And, I think to an extent earned, perhaps to an extent not, but I guess I am interested. Do you see, I guess, what do you see as this project, as the metric of success for Edison? I mean, what would consist of this project being a success for you? And if so, is that something that's going to incentivize you guys to be really pro rooftop solar and distributed resources if you can get something good out of it?
Well, I say getting back to just expectations around utilities related to distributed generation, we've identified a clear role for distributed solar, distributed storage in our clean energy pathway. Both Marty and Commissioner Randolph, I think all the panelists talked about some of the challenges with transmission. And so making sure we can utilize resources that are closer to load is important. And so I do think that we're moving past some of that, inherently natural tension, and as much as anything, because we're not even doing much generation anymore, right? So we're really focused on DERs and their ability to support reliability. So to your question about what do we hope to get out of this pilot? I mean, proof of concept, like can you call on these resources? Just like we've been able to now rely more on some of our smart thermostat programs, or other customer side programs and demand response. Is there something we can do here with the solar and storage providers? And then if it works, be able to scale it. I mean, remember, these are also systems that electric customers have been subsidizing through programs like S-chip and net energy metering. And so we want to make sure we're getting the value of them for our overall customer base.
I want to bring Mike in here too, since I know I'm sorry about the video aspect. I don't want Mike to get lost in this conversation. Mike, so much of what we've been talking about here is at least so much of what I've been asking about is about scaling things up quickly and how fast can we move. I'm really interested from, as your perspective, running a company that's putting the steel in the ground, how quickly could you, get more stuff, more, wind and potentially solar, with the needed transmission built relative to what you're doing now? And just, I guess I'm interested in what the financing of that looks like as well. I mean, what do you guys have the ability that you would need to, move at 50% or double the speed that you're going now, and sort of what and if not, what would you need to make that happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. Clearly, the scale up that we're talking about, let me do just a couple brief comments in. I think what we're all talking about and agreeing is there's a transition period here where you're never going to be 100% renewable by 2035 or 2045 in a reasonable way, I don't think. But there is the technology to do it. And to get you to 80%, as Marty said, fairly straightforwardly. And the question is what's the mix after going forward from there? If you look at the amount of megawatts, I mentioned that we will need about 150,000 megawatts of wind and solar to get us there. Now, maybe with storage and some other technical solutions on the transmission grid and all, we can help. I do believe the regional grid makes sense, and it reminds me of the old days in California where we swapped power from the Pacific Northwest. During the winter, we'd send up excess power because we had the capacity, and during the winter or summer, they had excess hydro capacity, and they'd send them to the south. And that small illustration on a regional basis can help integrate and just give more tools to the utilities and the regulators to balance the system. But if you think of 100,000 to 150,000 megawatts, that's what, 3 times the existing system almost. So there is a tremendous amount of capital that's going to be needed. If you look at some of the support federal programs that are being proposed by the Biden campaign currently, even the ones that were introduced by McKinley and Schrader the other day, the legislation, go a long way in supporting and facilitating the type of financing that's going to be needed to get there. There's been a huge amount of ESG movement in the investor market where if you look at even in the first 2 quarters of this year, it's multiples of the number of ESG investors in our entire history, let alone the last few years. So the capital is going to be available. There's more innovative, creative ways of structuring these transactions to make it even more financeable. But when you talk about, typically you talk about $1,000 a kilowatt, and so you can imagine the amount of dollars you're talking about to get to 100 to 150 gigawatts of new power to meet the climate needs and goals. So I would only say that there is incredible amount of capital out there looking for more deals. The capacity to supply the technology at the speed we're talking about will have to gear up. That's what I like about some of the latest proposals, both some of the Biden administration campaign proposals as well as some of the other ones that are being proposed in Congress to support manufacturing in the United States so we can increase our capacity locally to create more jobs as well as delivery. We'll have to scale up by 2 to 3 times our capacity to deliver in manufacturing to meet these goals. It is quite doable. I mean, the industry has done it before, and so as long as there's the manufacturing capability and the world delivery systems stay in place as they've been able to be pretty responsive to the COVID issue to get supplies disruptions moved around the world to keep them None of our projects have been seriously delayed because of supply problems, because of both domestic as well as foreign deliveries. But if you look at the hundreds of millions of billions of dollars that are going to be needed to build out this system, there is more capital out there chasing good deals than there are good deals. So there'll be capital and financing available, both debt and tax equity, but preferably tax equity will be the limiting issue in the next few years. And that's what I like about the Biden, as well as some of the other congressional proposals, is either direct pay or rebates to help facilitate the acceleration of this through the period when the economy improves and we have more taxpayers to be able to absorb some of the tax attributes of these projects.
So Mike, you've mentioned twice now regionalization, to go back to the beginning of your answer. And I promise I'm going to ask the other panelists a question about that in a minute, because I do want to get back to that. And I think it's an interesting question. But before we do that, just on, hearing, I guess for Commissioner Randolph, I think hearing Tom and Mike especially talk about, this, a much more sort of, dramatic and sort of scaled up build out of solar and wind and batteries, which to an extent, I think probably everyone would say that's needed to some extent here. But I guess I'm interested, knowing that the commission has obviously been very conscious and concerned, as you mentioned earlier, about costs and about what it costs to ratepayers, especially, to, as we go from, potentially 50% carbon free where we are now to 80 or 90 or 100. Solar and wind are cheap. I get that. Batteries are getting cheaper. There are still costs involved with building stuff. What do you see as, I guess, the biggest potential costs that ratepayers are going to be facing, both just on the grid in general as a result of, weather, climate conditions we're facing, and as a result of this transition to renewables to 100%? And I guess what do you see as the importance of balancing some of these potential costs on the horizon with, with moving quickly enough and perhaps faster?
Yeah. Cost is a really challenging issue because there's a lot of pressures on costs. There's the important wildfire hardening efforts that all of the utilities are undergoing, and those are costly, and the additional procurement that we are going to need over the next several years. And I think that's why it's important to be trying to spread out those costs over time to the extent possible, while still making substantial progress towards our goals. So I guess I don't have a good answer for that, other than to say it is something that we are really being mindful of. The pandemic is an example of sort of an unexpected cost hit that ratepayers are dealing with, because as more people are challenged to pay their bills, there are many more customers on the low income programs. More customers are in arrears in their payments. Usage patterns are changing. So these hits like that can affect ratepayers in unexpected and challenging ways, and we need to be mindful of that as we're setting forth our programs. And to the point Carla made, to the extent that we have various programs like NEM and SGIP, we want to make sure that we are extracting enough value from those programs to justify the cost.
This is a little bit of an abstract follow-up to that. But I guess I'm wondering if the commission has a way of thinking about, or if you have a way of thinking about the, explicit costs, through rates of, moving much faster, even moving as fast as we're going now, versus the, the non-explicit costs and, or I forget the economics term, unfortunately, someone remembers what it is, but the costs that are not included in rates, but that are still out there in the form of continuing to burn fossil fuels. I mean, I guess I asked that question because I think there's definitely a mentality of someone who would come on here and say, well, it doesn't matter how much it's going to cost. If we don't do it, it's going to be much worse no matter what.
Yeah, and that's part of the analysis that we do in the integrated resources planning proceeding. And we end up arguing back and forth quite a bit about it, about what the societal cost of carbon is, how to quantify that, and how to build that cost into the portfolios as we're analyzing the cost of the portfolios of resources that utilities are planning for. So it's very much part of our discussions and part of our conversation. You know, when we were having the conversation about 38 MMT versus 46 MMT versus 30 MMT, it was, I mean, the cost difference between 38 and 30 is significant. And so we are absolutely mindful of that, and we have to balance that in a way that does try to take into account the societal costs that we're also dealing with.
Thank you. And I've just got to say, I don't know how I forgot the term externality, but it came to me as you started to talk. My college economics professors would be very disappointed that that didn't come to mind.
Hey, Sarah, can I chime in on one?
Carla, go for it.
Raise, which is, you know, given her points and the issues around affordability, that's why it's so important to make sure that our modeling is as accurate as possible and that we're really reflecting the cost. And so I think there's an opportunity for us to do that. Everything from making sure that our demand forecasts are accurately accounting for weather conditions. I mean, how weather is going to look different given climate change than it used to be. Modeling how our resources will perform in high heat and things like that. And then also getting more accurate costs around some of these other technologies. I know one of the challenges for us in terms of thinking about, say, hydrogen or carbon capture and storage in our integrated modeling is there's not a lot of accurate or, you know, a lot of demonstrations of cost. And so we say something might be a viable resource, but we don't have enough experience with it or good enough cost information to really include it or compare it to, say, solar and wind. And so that's one of the things that I hope collectively we continue to work on, which is improving our modeling so that we can say to customers, hey, we've really looked at this carefully. This is what we need to do. I also want to flag and give the commissioner and the commission a shout out for the work they're doing on climate adaptation. They recently adopted a decision that requires the utilities to do climate adaptation plans and look at the impact of climate change to our infrastructure. And that's where you're going to start to be able to make some of these comparisons where you say, you know, if we don't make these investments in mitigation, what are we paying in the back end on adaptation?
So we're running a little low on time as we start to wrap up here. I promised that I was going to come back to the regionalization question. I think really I just want to pose this to Marty, and I hope everyone else forgives me for that. You know, as Mike described earlier, there's been an idea for a long time that California needs to work more, in a more coordinated way with the rest of the Western United States, perhaps through coordinated governance or a coordinated market. And it's been a controversial idea for quite a while because of, yes, there could be benefits from, easier, smoother sharing of resources, but then it's a question of who's in control. Is California in control of its own grid? Do other states have a say in us? And I think it's really interesting for DWP because obviously you guys operate your own system. You've been, I think, skeptics of this idea for quite a while. And you had the situation last month where the rest of the state had rolling outages and you guys with your own balancing authority were fine. So I guess, Marty, what my question is here is I'm interested in how do the events of the last month, how do they or don't they shape your thinking about regionalization?
Well, not that we like to be the skeptical ones, but yes, it's interesting. We've been through all of deregulation. We remain fully vertically integrated. So we have everything from generation, transmission, distribution, and it's worked well for the city. We're relying on the investments that our customers have made over decades and decades, and that's kept the lights on in LA. And part of it's having that local control and the ability to chart our own course, make sure that we have all the reliability that we need, the resource adequacy, knowing that we can model our own situation. And you're right, the last month, not only did we supply all the city of LA, but prior to CAISO needing more power, we supplied a tremendous amount of power to Arizona, who was having a record heat storm. And then following that, we supplied energy into CAISO. At one time during the first big heat time of about 2 weeks ago. At one point, we supplied all of LA and 1% of the rest of the state on top of that. We, saved several other jurisdictions from having rolling blackouts, and we pride ourselves on having the resources and being reliable within ourselves. At the same time, we've been willing to share and able to share our resources. We made transmission available to CAISO during the heat storm. We're joining the energy imbalance market so that we can really fully trade on more of a real-time basis and operate more in sync with everyone else, without giving up local control and our own autonomy. So I think that that's worked well for the city. We believe it's really made a difference for us and for the folks in our balancing authority, and it's kept us reliable and able to continue to chart our own energy future, and same time participate and share with everyone around us. So it's worked well without having to be formally integrated, formally regionalized, or give up any kind of control.
I would second that. I think LADWP has done an incredible job. If you look at the facts, both on the cost side and on the reliability side, LADWP is a poster child of how to operate a grid in a cost-effective and reliable way. And we do have the energy imbalance markets, and I think the data is there. So I'm not sure why we need to reinvent the wheel there or come up with a new scheme. We can trade renewable energy already across borders. That is not a new thing. So I think keeping the autonomy and the ability to run the grid in a very efficient way, I think that's most important.
So just Mike, I think it's interesting that you and Tom, it seems, disagree on this point, perhaps. Do you think he's right or wrong on that it's working well the way we have it right now?
Well, I think there are some excellent examples of how it works well now, but it's a question of what else can be done. I think that Marty has and LADWP has done an excellent job, but some of the utilities don't have the tools and the capabilities that he has, or in state and out of state. So it's really, I don't think anybody, I shouldn't say anybody, a number of us don't feel like you have to give up complete autonomy to this. How do you run the grid on a regional basis? It's really just accelerating and increasing the amount of cooperation between regions, and there are some real limitations currently. And to think about what it means so that there's more build out in the grid that will allow sharing in a more robust way, as Marty has done in the past. And I don't think that it necessarily changes how LADWP would operate. In fact, my guess is LADWP would continue operating the way it has. But they have been a regional entity, right? I mean, you have assets in Utah. You have access to capacity and energy from various parts of the region. So in a way, you're kind of a mini version of what's being talked about.
So let's end here with a lightning round, since we've got a minute or two left. I would like each of you to shout out and maybe very briefly explain one technology or tool or planning mechanism that you think would be helpful for ramping up clean energy towards 100% while maintaining reliability that we have not already discussed in this conversation. And who wants? Should I put someone on the spot? Tom, I'm going to put you on the spot. You go first.
Oh my God. Okay. I think I already checked like all of the boxes I could think of.
You can't say solar and batteries.
Time we're thinking.
I think software. I think people talk about the smart grid, right? I don't actually exactly know what that is. But we are getting better and better and better at forecasting, at understanding exactly how our systems will be performing. To give you an idea, our battery systems, we guarantee 99% availability. A gas plant is somewhere around 80. Once you start putting all this together into what I would call a synthetic power plant, A lot of smaller customers right now are a little bit at a loss. You have co-ops all over the country. You know,
So
they need
Tom,
20, 30.
I'm gonna have to cut you off because we're running out of time. Software is Tom's answer. Now that he's given you all a chance to think, who's next? Let's go 10, 15 seconds each here.
Well, I'll go before my idea is taken. Controlled charging electric vehicles.
All right, software controlled charging of electric vehicles. That's a good one. Who else? Leanne or Marty?
I'll go.
Commissioner Randall. Yes.
I still think long duration batteries that are not lithium ion, we still need. I know we could probably go do it without it, but I am excited about some companies that are really working on that problem. I would love to see those smaller long duration storage projects.
All right, smarter long duration storage. Marty or Mike, one of you?
Yeah, I don't think Carla said, she might have said the initials earlier, but compressed air energy storage might be able to move it different places, not always out in the desert, and have something that's kind of a medium duration storage of renewable energy.
And I'll plug myself. Everyone go read the story I wrote about that and what DWP is doing in Utah with compressed air energy storage. Thank you, Marty. And Mike, close us out.
I'll go with the long term would be offshore wind, but in the short term, I'd say the technical solution we need is refundable tax credits, because that's what's going to be the limiting factor for the next few years.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for this great panel. I've enjoyed this discussion. We'll briefly shout out that I write a weekly newsletter about all of these issues and much more called Boiling Point. And if you go to latimes.com/boiling point, you can sign up for that if you'd like. It's free. It comes out every Thursday. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks, Sammy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hands go.
Joining us now to introduce tonight's final speaker is Alex Pugh, Development Manager at Hecate Grid.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you to the LABC team for giving us the opportunity to say a few words. Hecate has been a proud member of the LABC over the last 5 years, and in that time, we really have been one of the beneficiaries of LABC's forward-looking policy approach and advocacy platform. Hecate has already developed and built nearly 200 megawatts of solar for LADWP, with 20 megawatts right here in Basin using the feed-in tariff program that was championed by LABC. And you see here behind me one of the projects that we built in urban Los Angeles. We are continuing to grow our business in California with Hecate Grid, where we are in construction on a 20 megawatt standalone energy storage project in Orange County that is part of SCE's preferred resources pilot that was referenced just a bit ago. That will support the grid during the hottest days of the year and will help manage system peaks and avoid outages. And we look forward to be part of SCE's experimentation and solution for the future of the grid. Hecate firmly believes in the promise of renewable energy, and this fire season shows without a doubt that global warming is a real threat. So it is beyond time for us to rapidly adopt new clean energy technologies. Hecate is working hard to make that a reality, and we have many thousands of megawatts of solar and storage in our pipeline throughout not just California, but the entire US. Hecate brings a track record of low-cost power projects and innovative workforce solutions, workforce development, and local investment. We count ourselves lucky to have LABC as an ally in this approach. With its like-minded and forward-thinking members, I have no doubt that we'll make the change that we all need to see. It is my pleasure to introduce R.A. McDonough, our second spotlight speaker of tonight and our final speaker. R.A. McDonough heads Energy West and LA investment banking for JP Morgan. In this role, he advises leading renewable, clean tech, power, water, oil, and gas companies. R.A. has been with JP Morgan and predecessor firms for 26 years. He has over 30 years of investment banking experience and is a founding member of JP Morgan's California Operating Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome R.A. McDonough.
Great, thank you so much, Alex, and appreciate the opportunity to be here. tonight with the Sustainability Summit. I apologize to the prior panel because I understand I was screen sharing. Let me see, I'm a neophyte in screen sharing. So I'm going to try to put up a little presentation we put together just to give you a sense of our approach at JP Morgan to sustainability. So if you bear with me for one moment here, let's see if I can get this up correctly. Okay. Okay. Great. So realizing here that I am probably the last thing standing between all of you and a reception, virtual reception, and perhaps actual cocktails and dinner, I'll try to go through this reasonably quickly in the next 5 to 10 minutes. But we did just want to share with you, JP Morgan is the largest US bank by assets as well as market capitalization, which means that we really work across all industries and see how sustainability is affecting all sectors of the economy. And that's really our approach to sustainability. We've embedded it in the way we think about risk. We've set up a specific committee inside the firm that just focuses on risks around sustainability, as well as our financing goals in terms of financing sustainable development, as well as helping all industries to create a better overall future. And I'll go to the next slide here just to give you a sense of some of the commitments that we've made up front. And first on the left side, as we think about opportunities where we're looking to finance sustainable development objectives, we've committed that this year in 2020, we will finance over $200 billion of sustainable development opportunities, and we are on track to achieve that actually quite soon. We also issued our first inaugural bond for JP Morgan. So we raised $1 billion about a week ago, actually, to support our own renewable goals, meeting our own operations. So we have committed that this year, by the end of 2020, we will be operating our network of branches as well as all of our buildings with 100% renewable power. And so that $1 billion will go towards making sure that that happens by the end of 2020. And then finally, we've also expanded our development capabilities around emerging markets, because clearly a lot of energy is going to be used as we see a lot of the emerging markets transformed into more middle class economies over time. And we want to make sure that we're part of helping that happen. Now, on the risk side of the house, we have also expanded our restrictions on no more financing for coal-fired power or coal mining businesses in general. And we've also prohibited project financing in the Arctic development. We've also, as I said, integrated a risk strategy around sustainability and added stress testing to the way we think about how climate change is affecting the economy and the markets more broadly. Now, when we step back and we think about what kind of changes will happen in the future and how will that affect energy, as the prior panel talked about, there are a lot of significant goals that we're quite supportive of. And what I've outlined just really one sustainable development scenario here, which is the IEA's, which does meet the Paris Accord emission targets. And it has pretty significant moves in what we've been seeing over the last several years, in that this scenario, which is out there publicly, conceives of 25% of aviation fuel by 2040 being biofuels, carbon sequestration moving up by about 70 times what it is now, and almost 1 billion electric vehicles on the road globally, which would be 50% of the global vehicle fleet. And then broadly, emissions declining quite rapidly across both scope 1, 2, and 3. And part of what drives that is about 2/3 of world electricity supply by 2040 would be renewables, which is a really significant increase from where we are now. But one thing that's important to realize that I think gets lost a little bit in some of the dialogue is there still will be oil and gas funding a lot of that longer term development. And when we look at the IEA scenarios and you compare the second set of bars here, and it's the 2018 numbers, 54% of energy worldwide was oil and gas. And if we go to the far right, that sustainable development scenario I just outlined with all of those great goals ends up having still 47% of the world's energy by 2040 is oil and gas. So it is important in that context where maybe we'll be using less oil and gas in the United States as we have more and more renewable energy, but there'll still be a lot of oil and gas that will be used, particularly in emerging markets, again, as they move towards middle-class development. And so it's important as we think about how do we help the energy transition that we also focus on how do we make oil and gas more sustainable over time. And that includes reducing emissions and flaring of gas. A bunch of the oil companies are now moving towards electrifying their operations with solar and wind, as well as focusing more on enhanced oil, where you can take carbon, there's new technologies to take carbon out of the air, as well as carbon off of industrial plants and inject it into the ground to create carbon neutral, even carbon negative oil for the future. And then finally, alternative fuels. And that's one of the things that California has been a real leader in is the LCFS whole program has really driven the adoption of renewable diesel in particular and renewable fuels more broadly. And that's going to be important as we move towards these sustainable goals. Now, one of the things that's really important about what California's done over time is the renewable power standard. And a lot of people don't realize that the objectives there have been really substantial in driving change, not just in California, but across the entire country, such that the vast majority of the emissions that have been reduced over the last 10 to 12 years and globally have been driven by the utility industry. And it really started with California driving towards these goals, and almost every other state has adopted them. So you can see in the very bottom here, 27% of the emissions decline over the last 11, 12 years has been driven by the power industry by far more than any other. And that really is due to the California policies, ones that we need to continue to focus on. How do we do that in other sectors as well? And that includes, as I said, renewable diesel would be an area, because what we were just talking about on the prior panel in terms of storage being important, what happened with wind and solar, if you looked back 12 years ago, you would have said, geez, they don't really compete with gas or coal. Now it's less expensive. So it's really driven down the cost curve across all of wind and solar, to the extent that we need to be thinking about ways then doing that for storage so that we don't have the issues we just have with reliability, and we can actually have storage that's cost effective. And to do that, we'll need to have programs like the RPS that apply to some of the other parts of the renewable sector. One point I wanted to make, and Governor Newsom has made it quite a bit over the course of the last year or two, is that it's really important to have healthy utilities in California to be able to achieve our renewable goals. And JP Morgan's really been privileged to be the leading bank across the utility sector in California in terms of providing over $60 billion of financing and advisory transactions over the past few years. And then we've also done a lot on the whole renewables landscape. Even last week, we announced a transaction where we advised BP, who for $1.1 billion had bought into a very large set of wind projects off the coast of Long Island and Nantucket. On the very right side of that top bar, you can see that we advised on Brookfield's acquisitions of Terraform Power and Terraform Global, which is the largest renewable M&A transaction at the time. And then the bottom, we've done a lot of work, and I have personally too, around clean tech. We led about 2 weeks ago the largest electric vehicle IPO, which was out of China, XPeng. And then we also have led some innovative IPOs like Bloom Energy, which is in Northern California, is a fuel cell distributed generation company. We led that IPO, as well as TPI Composites, which is the largest wind blade manufacturer in the United States. We led their IPO as well a few years ago. And then on green bonds, as I talked about, we led our own green bond last week, $1 billion, but we've also led the most green bonds across the market for the last 8 or 9 years, including, you can see in the upper left, Alphabet, which is Google, raising their $10 billion green bond in August, which is the largest green bond of all time. And then just to close it out, I just wanted to highlight in the bottom left of this page on our own green bond we did last week. It is going to be used for green buildings and renewable energy in our own operations. So we are eating our own cooking, so to speak. So with that, I will turn you all over to cocktails, reception, dinner, what have you, and really appreciate your time, and including JP Morgan and the conference.
Joining us now, Mary Leslie, President of LABC.
Thank you for joining us today for the 2020 Sustainability Summit. We hope you enjoyed today's program and outstanding speakers. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow as well for a full day of presentations from our 38th Governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, the British Ambassador to the US, Dame Karen Pierce, US Congressman Alan Lowenthal and Tony Cardenas, California Secretary of Natural Resources, Wade Crowfoot, and last but not least, our summit partner, USC President Carol Folt. She will have a fireside chat with our very own mayor, LA Mayor Eric Garcetti, and much more. See you bright and early tomorrow at 8:30. Thank you.